What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another One Piece related video. In this video, guys, we're going to be doing an update to Rebecca, and I think that going forward, because of the fact that I'm playing so much Rebecca, or I've given up on trying to play the top meta decks. Not that I can't. I have all the pieces to Sokka. I just don't enjoy Sakazuki nearly to the degree that I enjoy Rebecca. I'm not buying $80 categories so I can play Enel. So I'm going to be revisiting and updating weekly my favorite deck, which is Rebecca. I still think that she's strong, and I think next set I have a really fun list that we're going to be testing out and trying to see how that goes, while also continuing this current list to see if maybe there's some tweaks and stuff we can make to make it better. But the current list has been tweaked 3 times this week since my video was made. 2 days ago I made a video, but I have played a grand total of like 29 games or something like that on the rank sim between then and now. I released that video. I then went to the rank sim, streamed it, and I have built a ton. So technically, when I recorded that video, I recorded that list last week after my locals. It was actually a pretty good showing for that list at my locals. I think it was 2-2 on Friday, and it was 2-2 on Wednesday. So, I mean, 50-50 isn't that bad when it's a brand new list, and I'm trying to figure out what I need to do, and I'm facing a plethora of different matchups. So if you like that previous list, continue to use that list. I don't think it's a terrible list. I think that there is definitely some holes and weaknesses within it. Some of that being the fact that there's just too many things that I am trying to constantly be able to reanimate. There's too many targets, too many things that I need to play around with. And so the strategy becomes a little watered down. This one is a little bit more focused. And on top of that, I found that there is a better top-end card who I had previously removed from my list because I didn't like him, but that was because I was also trying to fit him in with 3 Luffys. So let's get into this list real quick, and then we'll kind of discuss the matchups that I think Rebecca is good in and bad in, and why each of those work. Kind of some play patterns maybe you need to take while playing Rebecca. So initially, Luffy was kind of the big boss for Rebecca, has been since last set, and I think that that is okay to think about, but I think that relying 100% on this combo is very one-dimensional and makes you very anticipated by your opponents. Rebecca then loses to many more of these matchups, I think. Sakazuki just kind of can play around a Luffy. Like, it's not that hard. It's only cost 7, which sounds like a lot, but really isn't that high for him. It's a swing, a Great Eruption into a Borso, and he is now removed for 8 Dawn. He has now removed your Luffy, redeveloped a big board for himself, and got a swing in at your face. Not ideal. On top of that, even if he doesn't have a removal like that, if he's already developed a Borsalino that you haven't been able to get rid of, he can just add a Dawn or 2 to him and swing in, and it's going to cost you quite a bit of resources to keep him alive. So in that matchup alone, Luffy has not been very valuable. The matchup that I think Luffy is valuable in is being a finisher top end for against Yellow. If Yellow cannot heal the turn that you drop Luffy, if they're at 1 and they can't drop a heal and they're trying to figure out a way to clear your board state, but you have like a blocker or 2, your Luffy becomes extremely valuable. You can use him to swing once, clear one of their things, restand, and if you have enough to then be able to swing twice the next turn, if you're in Kongan range still, bam, you can literally just end their day right there and then. As long as you don't hit like a Beige out of life, it'll be fine. So in that case, I still want to keep one of each of those parts of the combos there, but I don't want to rely on the combo. I more or less want it to be something that we can tech in, and if we really need it as a finisher, we can cycle it into our second rotation of the deck. The big thing that Rebecca succeeds at doing that Sokka can't do as well is cycling through the deck. Why? Sokka gets rid of 1 card a turn from hand. At best, with a Sabo, that's 3 cards. Rebecca always guarantees 1 card going away while adding a card to hand. You're gaining card advantage and getting rid of a card. On top of that, we are relying on our Rebecca searchers, which is the same as him. So already we're very similar, right? 1 card from our leader ability, 2 cards from our searcher. That doesn't seem that much more. Well, Kyros is one of our main cards. That's another card that we can get rid of. Or Lumbus is one of our main cards. That's 2 cards that we're getting rid of. On top of that, we run 4 Sabos opposed to 2, so we have more Sabo searches to go through. We are just consistently able to just dig through our deck a bit more. Because we have 5 extra cards that are digging through our deck as well. On top of that, we utilize our cards out of our hand more than he does to a degree. A lot of our stuff just goes to our trash from utilization. His stuff sticks around. that is kind of good on his part, but we also have those same sticky cards that he has. It's just like when you use Suru plays and gets stuck there until somebody removes it. Whereas our one-legged soldier goes there, plays it, gets rid of itself, and that adds a card to our trash, which is impactful for both just our Truno Bastardos, our Kongun, and our Luffy. So we can fill up our trash pretty consistently. If our Olympus sticks for a couple of turns, that's more than 2 cards per Olympus. That's already 4 cards off of the Olympus. That's pretty useful. I have made it so many games with this deck last night. I had 3 out of my 4 games. I was a sub 10 cards in my deck before I started cycling cards back into my deck and I was stacking cards. Those 10 cards remaining were already stacked. I was starting to stack the cards under that. And I was keeping it about 14 cards in deck because I could dig to them pretty consistently because I was constantly adding Sabos and Rebeccas and my dig power back into it so that I can get the exact card that I needed. This then leads to the fact that because Rebecca can get there, you're grinding your opponent out of resources like you used to Rebecca, right? Like that was how you used to play the combo, right? You sit there, you clear their board and grind them out of resources and try to stay alive. This deck does this well without 2-drop blockers. But by the way, no real 2-drop blockers. Early on, you're using your 2k counters to kind of avoid damage, and then you start getting into your Rebecca cycling where you start playing Rebeccas. You can get back stuff to help you remove things, or you can get a Rebecca to grab a Sabo, play a Sabo, draw cards, try to keep a Sabo, do it again. There's a lot of ways that you can utilize this build path with her, and it's part of why I really like this build, and I think that Rebecca the leader can be a very strong contender in this current meta. Now note, this deck has been tooled with the Luffy's coming down to 1, the Konguns going down to 1, the Colosseum's going down to 1, because the Colosseum really only adds value now for Kyros to be there, or if we really need an attacker to go in early, we can do that, but we don't really rely on it other than for keeping Kyros alive and getting our Luffy a swing. If you can take it early, otherwise you just don't. It doesn't matter if you don't see it. Like, your Kyroses are a little less sticky, but it's still requiring 2 cards to get rid of a Kyros. And most of the time, people aren't trying to KO it because they know it's hard to get rid of, so they just don't try to KO it. They're like, nah, I'm not gonna deal with that. So when we look then, how does this deck play differently than the previous list we talked about? Well, we got rid of our Dragon Claws, added in 2 extra Patchworks, which just gives us more Dawn minus effects because this card has just been insane. It's really good at locking down like Rush Zoros, so if I don't have a way of removing them, I can just lock them down. Pretty useful. Hound Blazes, instead of adding extra Hound Blazes instead of what was the card? Instead of 3,000 Worlds, has become more valuable. Because for 2 cards and at 3, we can do the exact same thing that 3,000 Worlds got rid of, but we also pump one of our characters to either swing in for a guaranteed attack on our opponent, get a couple cards out of their hand, or remove another character on their board. Hound Blaze has just become more valuable. It's just a good card to have. It also is a great way to help finish out a swing to win the game. We've replaced our 2 Luffys with 2 Borsalinos. This is just more removal power. And while, yes, if we hit them on searches, we lose them. Okay, that sucks. There are good chances that you're going to draw into them. You have the Sabos for drawing. And you were going to play multiple Sabos throughout this. You can also potentially patchwork out of your life to just draw 2 cards, trash a card, because it gains you cards. And if you already have a patchwork, you don't always need a second one. But this deck also has the Borsalino 4-drop blocker because this helps with the Sokka matchup. It also technically helps with the yellow matchup quite a bit. Gives you another hard to deal with blocker, but you don't want too many of him because most of the time he ends up being a 1k counter. But there are certain matchups where you definitely want him. So we have him as a 2-of and a 2-of of Vorlumbus instead. So let's talk about the matchups here. I've already kind of alluded to them a little bit, so let's talk about the matchups real quick. This is a Sakazuki killer deck. Like, this deck just destroys Sakazuki majority of the time. So far, my record at locals against Sokka is 5-1, and that 1 could have been a win, except my opponent hit the nuts of cards he needed to deal with me, and I top decked into absolutely nothing. Like, I just couldn't get a good top deck, and I had 2 ability whiffs from my leader, which in that particular matchup was rough. Which is something that is a threat, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 cards that technically can make us whiff. It's not common that it will happen, but it can happen. It has happened. It will probably happen at some point to you. Do not fret over it unless this is like the critical juncture of I need X cards to win or to survive, then you'll be fine. Losing a card or two, losing 2 cards to the trash isn't that big a deal. It gives you more stuff to recycle. It actually fills your trash 2 opposed to 1 that turn, which can be relevant. But we do have 13 cards that can make us miss. So in the Sokka matchup, though, why this is such a good one is we have 5 cards that they have to use Hound Blaze, or if they're running the 3000 Worlds, or if they're running multiple Borsos, they have to use those to get rid of. If they don't, we can get them back. On top of that, they just can't KO them, and that's problematic for them. On top of that, if that's how they're using those removals is just to get rid of these sticky monsters, we are forcing the Hound Blazes to be dug out. So they're having to get rid of other cards to try to find these answers to these cards, because otherwise we're just getting free swings at them constantly. And that is a problem for them. That is a difficult situation for them to be in. On top of that, we can then force them to not be able to KO things because we run 4 Sabos. So ultimately, your most important cards versus the Sakazuki matchup, outside of doing your combos to clear stuff and being efficient with how you clear, is having Borsalino, Kyros, and Sabos. You don't have to dig for the Borsos. They're just a nice additive. The 2 most important cards are going to be your Sabos and Kyroses because they're just a pain in the ass for them to deal with. And if they're trying to clear your stuff by swinging into it, and you have a Rebecca, and you know you're going to have 9 Dawn next turn, one of the best things you can do, actually, is just let the Sabo block it, die. You play Rebecca. While you're not getting another swing, you're getting the Rebecca, get the Sabo back, play the Sabo, get to filter out more cards, and now none of your stuff can be KO'd again. It's super annoying for them. It makes their deck fall apart really, really fast if they can't keep KOing your board, and now because you have multiple characters that can't be KO'd, they really don't want to deploy the Lucci. And if they really need to get rid of stuff, they're wasting Hound Blazes to get rid of other stuff half the time. So these 7 cards here are the most important. The second most would be the Borsalinos, and then after that, it's just playing your control very easily. You were very favored in that matchup. You had more filtering. You have more card advantage. You were just favored in that matchup in general. Feel free to let your Luffys go away, but do be aware of how much cards you have left in your deck, and make sure you always have a Rob Lucci or a Moncherie at bare minimum being put back from one of these 2 cards, just so that you don't have a chance of decking yourself most of the time. Preferably the Moncherie's back, because you can search those. You can't search the Luccis. Just be aware of where they are in your deck, and you'll be fine. As for the Enel matchup, I can't give you a lot of advice. Sadly, I suck into the Enel matchup. I've done so much trial and error to try to beat Enel. And it really comes down to one of 2 things. If they are running a more mid-rangey list, where it's like the 3 Yamatos, 1 7-drop Mom, 2 7-drop Enels, and 4 Katakuris, you actually have a chance of winning that list. That list is very much a winnable list for you. The list that is not is the one that runs like 3 to 4 copies of the 7-drop Mom. Having so many things that are like, hey, do you want me to heal or you want to take damage? It's so rough for Rebecca. You want to keep Enel at 1. You want to be putting pressure on him to have to use his cards out of his hand to stay alive. If you cannot do that because he keeps healing every freaking turn, you are in a terrible position, because you also need to remove that 7-drop Mom. Now note, a way around that is the 2 cards that we have one ofs is actually pretty solid into that matchup as a top-end finisher. But you also have to be establishing enough blockers that are not getting KO'd, not being rid of, that can't be, you can't be developing only Rebecca's, because Amarus gets through that. So you need a Sabo or 2, and you need, and that's really your only way out of that scenario. Sabos are super important in that matchup as well. But you need Sabos, and you need Kyros to just keep punching above his weight class, holding on to Orlumbus. If they have to Thunderbolt an Orlumbus, you're actually in an okay spot. Because you have other ways of dealing with their big stuff. Reanimating with Rebecca is one of those routes. Even just having a horticulture, a patchwork, and a Truno Bastardo actually helps you a ton. This is 5 Dawn to get rid of something. You can still deploy a Sabo that turn, keep your stuff from being able to be KO'd, and it becomes problematic for them. You start building tempo again. But know that you have to play the Enel one kind of late, but you have to keep getting in as much chip damage as you can early, trying to get cards out of their hands. But don't overinvest on doing chip damage. Make sure you hold your Olumbuses back so they can't be swung at unless you have a for sure amount of blockers to keep them alive. And if they're only playing one guy per turn, and you can develop a character while removing one of theirs, you're going to start getting the tempo, and that's how you're going to win. But that's really what you're banking on, is that they don't have a whole lot of out of life. And if they do have an out of life, you got to bank that you have an out of life with like a Truno or something, or maybe even just have the proper amount of removal. This deck now has more removal. I think you were better suited to be able to deal with yellow. It is still a very hard matchup. Just be aware, this is probably still your worst matchup is versus Enel and then Katakuri. Katakuri is also very rough for you because he can just swing 7 early on. And if you want it, and I think Enel early on is easier, but later becomes harder. And then Kata early on is harder to survive. But if you could stay at 4 early versus Kata, that's kind of where you want to be. You want to stay at 4 life as long as you can, 5 life if you can really help it, while maintaining building a board state and getting cards back and gaining slowly getting card advantage. If he's not building a board and you can build a mid-game board, you could start chipping away at his life like you do with Enel, and you're just going to be playing into those 10-drop moms and saving your stuff to pop the moms if you can. So versus Kata, you want more 2Ks. Versus Enel, you just want like 1, maybe 2 2Ks, kind of stop some of his early damage while developing a board state and potentially removing whatever early board state he might get out. And as for the last big matchup, it's going to be Purple Luffy, right? Like that's the last big deck most people talk about. So into the Purple Luffy matchup, if they're developing 1 card a turn, be it a Magellan, be it a blocker, whatever it is, you can remove it. I would not remove the blocker laws as much. They're not as an impactful thing that you need to remove. The things you need to remove, you need to bottom deck Magellans if you can see it. You need to just KO bottom deck, whatever you need to do to the 5-drop kids. They are super important to that deck. You get rid of them, that's a problem for them. And as they get into the late game, if they start dropping 7-drop kids or Kaidos, if you can remove them, remove them. Otherwise, get blockers in the way and just ignore them. Kid more so than the Magellan. Once Magellan's on board, he's just a big boy. So if you know that they're trying to set up for a Magellan turn, that's when you need to play a Sabo, really defeat how much they can actually get rid of. 2K when you can, try to stay at about 3 to 4 life for as long as you can. Dropping to 3 is fine. Dropping below 3 becomes a little bit scary in the mid game to late game. And most of these lists are going to have a lot of 2Ks. So when you're trying to get swings in, just be prepared that your early swings are just going to eat 2Ks. So putting it at 6 is probably the best number early. Because while 7, yes, eats 2 cards, if you need that Dawn, don't use it. If you can afford 1, use 1. Try to maintain your hero power. Try to maintain card advantage. And find ways to spot remove the mid-game stuff. Get rid of the 7-drop kids. If there's a Kaido and you have the ability to get rid of him, like if you're up to 15 cards and your Truno's at 6 and you can patchwork it and Truno it, do it. But don't go don't get too heavy-handed at removing him. Try to make sure you can stack Sabos, prevent them from being able to play another one soon, and just try to overrun you. If you need a Sabo to die so you can keep reanimating Sabos, do it. He allows you to dig through your deck. He allows you to get to 15 sooner, which allows you to Truno and get those things out of the way. Try to save the Trunos for those things. If you really don't have any other way of getting rid of a 5-drop kid, you need to get rid of a 5-drop kid, so just get rid of it. And then with the Borsalinos, you actually have ways of dealing with those 5-drops a little bit more consistently later on. Yeah, that's about it for advice for that one. That matchup is actually pretty favored into your favor because if they're not ramping enough, they're not going to get to those big guys as fast. But if they are ramping a ton, they're going to get lower, so any attack you're throwing at them is going to start taking counters out of their hand. And you just want to deal with their stuff. If they're using the package that allows them to drop multiple characters a turn, they're all in the 4 range. Your Luchis are going to be super important, but the biggest things that are going to be important are going to be like having Sokkas, having Kiroses, or Lumbus is going to be really nice to have. Having the 2 Borsos helps with that matchup quite a bit. And then just your reanimator pieces to be able to start removing things. Do not be afraid to use your Lucci to remove 1. Well, yes, you definitely want to try to be able to remove 2. If you're on an 8-Dawn turn and you can Rebecca, get a Hina, and then get your Lucci, like you have a Hina in hand and you can pick up a Lucci, do it. Like if it's removing a character, remove a character. It's better to remove a character and put some threats on the board than it is to just like sit there and be like, oh, well, I can't remove them, so I'm going to find this inefficient way of just removing them with like Truno and blah, 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 blah. No, remove a character, make it less threats, try to maintain as many 2Ks in your hand as you can, prevent the damage. If you have to take the damage, take the damage, and then crack back, try to clear things, get their 2Ks. I recommend starting off with, if you don't think that you're going to be able to clear their board through attacks, like if there's a lot of 5Ks on the board, like if they have a lot of the 5Ks or 6K guys on the board, and you have a Rabluchi and a Hina, try a couple of swings at it, try to get a couple cards out of their hand, because you don't necessarily want to put more cards in their hand from their life at that point, but you want to try to clear their stuff, and then go into trying to clear stuff there. Because if you're still getting stuff out of the way and then still being able to clear, that's the best thing you can do, is try to get rid of as many of their resources as you can that's on the board, and as many resources in their hand as you can, and then as the game goes late, you're going to win. If you cannot tell, this deck wants to go late, so try to play for it slowly, try to control, try to get to the point where you can play late and start winning late game while getting chip damage in against a lot of different matchups. Getting Enel down to 1 is pretty impactful, getting Katakuri down to 1 is pretty impactful, getting Sokka down to 1 is really impactful. But for Sokka, you don't necessarily need to clear his life as much early. You can get a chip damage here or there in. If you get him down to a 3 or 2 pretty early, that's fine. You need to just start clearing his board and emptying his hand. And then the same thing goes with and then in terms of like if it's a Rebecca mirror, I think you're just favored to beat a normal Rebecca deck, because you play kind of like a Sokka, so you're gonna your normal Rebecca loses to Sokka still more often than not. And I would say that this build does really good into Sokka, and does pretty good into the Rebecca. So just be aware, you want to play for late. You don't have to go too aggressive. Don't try to pop off too early. But I mean, if your opponent's running out of cards, not developing characters, start swinging. In terms of like red-green law, because that is a matchup that might pop up, clear the characters where you can, get pressure on their life when you can. It's not that big a deal giving them cards through their hand. They already have cards. If you know what some of those cards are, just try to play around what those cards are. Don't let yourself be open to being killed, but get chip in at their life, get them down to 1 or 2, put pressure on them so that they have to figure out if they can overextend. If they're overextending with attacks, you can take a turn off of swinging at their life, clear their board state, and really screw up their game plan of how to win. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you find this video informative. Hopefully you guys, maybe you like this update to the deck list here. This is probably the list I'm going to be keeping with for the rest of this week. I'll try to give an update video the week of the posting of this video, which would be Tuesday. I'll probably still be on this list. I'm liking this list a lot. There might be some tweaks, and I'll make a video the following week with that, and then we'll get some gameplay for next Thursday. But until then, guys, hope you have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.